So we're fortunate today to have two experts on fishing who I've known for a few years now, Ivo Balinov and Ciprian Rafan. So Ivo's experience, he's been on that, that Canadian team I talk about in their 2016 victory. Both these gentlemen have been on that team. They have a company called Smart Angling, so they've got lots of wonderful products for fly fishing. Uh, Ivo has experience has been in North America, in Europe, and also in the Caribbean. He likes to fish for permit and other fish there. He has been Euronymphing long before it was popular in North America. And today he's going to show us a lot about leaders and how to rig them and how to fish them. And Ciprian, I think his first memory of fishing was back when you were about 3 years old, Ciprian?
Yeah, something like that.
Something
I remember
like that.
I was like, I remember that I was running after the fish my father he will catch, So
Yeah, we all have little flashes of that. And you're from Romania, correct?
yes, I'm from Romania, Eastern Europe.
Yeah,
Also.
so that
we are neighbors with Ivo, Romania, Bulgaria, we are neighbors.
Neva, yes. And his passion has been trout fishing. And I fished with both these gentlemen and had sessions with them, and it's just an incredible experience. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for being there. So Ivo, Ciprian, take it away.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll be very short with the introduction because I want to leave as much time as possible to talk about fishing. Plus, Brian already flattered me a lot. But anyway, I've been fishing since I was 4 or so and fly fishing for about the last 20 years. It was about 15 years ago that I started European nymphing. At that time, the term European nymphing didn't exist, actually. It still doesn't in Europe. There's Czech nymphing, French nymphing, Spanish nymphing, or just nymphing. And I sort of gradually watched it grow in North America. And over the years, got the chance myself to fish with some of the very best anglers in the world, to which group I don't necessarily belong. So you've seen the title of today's presentation, and know it's cutting edge. It's cutting edge from really things that both Ciprian and I have had the chance to fish with some of these guys. Over the last few years, we've fished with some of the best Spanish guys, which are right now at the top, some of the best French guys, and some of the Czech guys. So we just want to share with you a few of the things that we've learned that we know you're not going to read or see much. There's a lot being written about European nymphing, but the reality is that in North America, it's a few years behind where it really is in the world, at least in the world of competitive fishing in Europe. So we want to share with you a few things that we hope will help you improve your own fishing. I've heard that you've already had several presentations this season. I know Ian has spoken to you, and then Dave Forgeron. So you have a bit of a general notion on European nymphing or tight line sticking, whatever you want to call it. So we won't get too much into that, but we will go a little bit through the basics in the beginning, and then we'll talk more about setting up leaders, which is one of the most important things in this way of fishing. So before we move on to that, I'll just pass it on to Ciprian to say a few words about himself.
Yeah, there's not much to say about myself. Like I just love fishing, guys. It's actually it's my OCD. It's fly fishing. Actually, I really love fly fishing, and yeah, I start fishing when I was about 3 years old. That's my first memory about fishing. It's like running after those fish that my father would catch, and wow. But I've been fishing for 26 years. Well, not 26 years, but until I was 26, I've been fishing in Romania, and I can tell you about those waters. They're really like tough water to fish, because the fishing pressure in Europe is not like here. Over there, it's high fishing pressure. I mean, on the river, you will meet probably 20, 30 fishermen a day, which is really high pressure. So to be able to catch a fish, you really have to do the right thing. And this is what I can tell you about nymphing. It's a technique that's gonna give you that chance to catch a fish in those tough conditions, And my favorite, I can tell you about my favorite waters are small, clear gin water streams, where it's really difficult. This is what I like to do, you know. I fish any kind of waters. I fish for all type of fish. Like it's not only trout. I catch bass on nymphs. Actually I was catching bass on nymph with Ivo. Uh, we just fish, but not a nymph, but we go for muskie. You can go for walleye. Fly fishing actually is for everything, you know. So yeah, kind of that's it with me, you know. I
I'm
will
gonna
pass on Ivo.
Yeah, I'll bring up a few slides that we wanted to take you through. But again, feel free to interrupt us at any time during the presentation. You know, better ask a question when it's on your mind or when we're talking about something specific than leave it to the end. So we won't be disturbed or offended in any way. Just remember to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Essentially, I want to take you through, just do a brief comparison of European nymphing or Czech nymphing, whatever you want to call it, to the traditional, the typical way that people nymph. And you will be familiar with some of those, and I'll try to explain what is different about it and why it works. And then from there, we will go to the leaders that are designed to make it to perform. So I'm going to compare it, and I'll take you through some illustrations here of what I call traditional nymphing styles, or at least what I personally experienced before I got introduced to European nymphing. And I suspect that some of you have done these things or keep doing them as well. The first thing, very common, is nymphing with an indicator and a tapered leader. So you have, you know, a bobber, a little indicator that floats on the surface. Then you're suspending your nymph underneath it on a tapered leader. So you can see a little curve in the leader. And then you have, you know, the other portion of the tapered leader above that leading to your rod. You're going to catch fish like this, of course, people do, but it has a number of disadvantages. The first thing is that the current on the surface is almost always faster than the current on the bottom, which means is that it's going to grab your indicator, going to speed it up, and it's going to prevent your nymphs from sinking naturally to the bottom. The other thing, when you're fishing with a nymphing with a tapered leader, you know, in between the indicator and the fly, one of the things that happens is that when the fish takes the fly, it has to straighten that up before you register the take. So you're going to register the really good takes, you know, and you will notice when you nymph like that, you're going to be catching fish that have the fly in the scissors here. Those are the fish that really took aggressively and went away with your fly. But there will be many fish that just touch your fly and take it gently, and you wouldn't even know about it if you're doing this. The other problem is if you look above the float, above the indicator, you have a portion of your leader that is tapered, that has a belly in it. Now, for you to react to the take, you have to straighten up that belly before you can hook the fish. So that's another problem with this. You're going to catch fish like this, as I said, but there's some disadvantages, and you're going to miss on lots of opportunities to get more fish. You can partially deal with this problem by with some of the issues by having sort of a thinner tippet right under the float and not tapering it. But again, you still have the problem with the current, as you mentioned, that doesn't disappear if you're using an indicator or a floating indicator. And then there's the issue with the belly in your line above that there's going to be a lag in the hook set. The other thing is the sink tip. I mean, sink tip is a great way to fish, maybe out west. Maybe there's a few rivers in Ontario where you can swing for steelhead and like that, but it's typically for fish where you expect a really aggressive take. And if you try and do it in a river with complex current, it's a big mess because it's going to take your leader and it's not going to be straight. So again, you're going to get lots of takes and you wouldn't even know about them. So you're kind of limiting yourself to the most aggressive fish and losing a lot of opportunities because most of the takes with trout are actually not aggressive. They will just you know, touch your fly and let it go as soon as they know it's not what they want. So the kind of the logical way to deal with all of these issues is this. You just fish on a straight line. And that's the underlying idea of all European nymphing techniques. The Czech do it pretty much under the rod tip, just like that. The Spanish have wild trout rivers. The fish don't let them that close, so they will cast much longer. But again, they try and keep everything as straight as possible, so they have contact with the flies. And the French are somewhere in between. So if you want to fish on a tight line, you will probably, right now, it's European nymphing is so popular. You're going to read all sorts of things. You're going to see tons of leader formulas, tapered leaders for European nymphing, mixing different colors of tippet, which color is best, which color is worse. And I went through like 15 years of European nymphing leaders evolution, like trying different things, playing with all of these tapered leaders, and some of them were not even line. I fished with pieces of Dacron and all sorts of things, just to find out, to come to a conclusion, especially after fishing with some of the best Spanish, French, and Czech guys, that it's actually quite simple. There's basically two portions of your leader when you're nymphing. One is the sider. So this is that's basically a colored leader, a colored portion. And then your tippet. So the sider, you will, again, read these days in the books and presentations. Lots of people will recommend a tapered one because it helps you cast small flies and so on. Problem with a tapered one, you're losing a lot of sensitivity. You're limiting yourself to detecting takes by sight fishing rather than by feeling them. And a good chunk of the takes you can actually feel. And the other thing is that those things are heavy. They're impacted by the wind. So it gets windy, not a lot of fun to nymph like that. And also a heavy leader, even if it's very light in your mind, is going to influence the drift of your flies. So they're not going to go as natural as they would with something very light. So it's quite simple. You want this portion to be level, not tapered, and the lowest diameter possible. The same thing applies to your tippet, the lowest diameter you can handle. So what does the lowest diameter mean? For me, if I'm fishing for trout, let's say at the Grand River, where I think a lot of you guys go, that would be 0.15 to 0.16 millimeters diameter. So that's 5.5x to 6.5x in the EX system. I don't know what it is in inches. And I nymph for both steelhead and bass as well. And this is where I go a little bit higher on the sider to 0.18 to 0.22. So that's 4x to 2x. You can build it in a couple of different ways. You can tie together several, you will see in the presentation, the slide, kind of the 3 different colors. There's 2 reasons for that. One is you want to have some sort of a change of colors because it helps visibility. But there's also, you'll see this gray area that I put in between, which can be actually a piece of transparent line or white line if you can find, or black, which will help you that every now and then you're going to fish and your whole entire tippet is going to sink, and one portion of your leader will start sinking in the really deep pools. So you need kind of a second reference point to be able to see what's going on. So that's what that extra session lets you do. Now you have to basically find 3 different types of colored mono that and tie them together. You can do that, or there's a shortcut. There's tricolor lines now on the market where you can just get a full piece of that and you're set.
Ivo,
yeah.
Just for my knowledge and for people who haven't fished this technique before, the sider is the different colored parts of the section of the leader that you use to be able to judge the depth?
No, the sider is basically, you want to be able to see the sider because that's what allows you to see and control your drift. Most of the time, when you're fishing, the sighter will be above the water. Occasionally, one part of it may sink when you go to deeper pools. But
Right.
you want to set up your rig that so that your tippet is about, let's say, an hour, 1.5 times longer than the average depth you'll be fishing. So most of the
Right.
time, your sighter is not going to get in the water except in the very deep pools. So the sighter is essentially your tool to control, to see where your rig is going.
Yeah.
You know, to make sure you're keeping it tight. It's not slack, because if it's slack, you know, your flies are not going to drift the right way. You know, you're going to lose contact with your flies.
And by having
So-
it colored, you can see it against the visual background when it's out of the water.
Absolutely. And they're different colors that are different for different people. We tend to see colors differently, and they're also different for different light conditions. So
Exactly.
you can play with colors and you can find the ones that work for you. My favorite all-round combination is a mix of green or yellow and orange. And I like to have the orange at the very end, you know, before the connection with the tippet, because I see orange really well. And that becomes sort of the most visible part of my leader. But I know people that prefer to have green there or yellow. So you can try with you know, with the different materials and see what works best for you. Typically, green and yellow are better in darker day, I think, against the background of the light. But again, I've spoken to different people, and people tell me that they really see the colors differently. So you know, you'll have to play with it and find what works for you. Do you want to add anything, Ciprian?
No, it's the only thing I want to say. It's about the sighter, you know, because the sighter is not actually something to detect the strike of the fish. It's more like you can keep your flies in perfect drift according to the current. So the sighter is going to follow the current of the water, which is very important. That's actually my definition for nymphing. It's like being able to be in contact with your flies without, let's say, touching the flies, without, and having, let's say, having a perfect dead drift in the same time, but still being in contact with your flies. And if you don't see the sighter well, you won't be able to adjust your drift to the current, which is really, really important in nymphing, you know. Some people, they might detect the strike by seeing the strike, you know, but most of the time you're going to feel that thing, you know.
Yes.
And
I just wanted to
that's really important.
clarify what that section was used for, and you guys explained it perfectly. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
That makes sense.
does this leader go right onto a regular fly line? Like, do you go loop to loop connection onto a regular fly line?
It goes into a nymphing line, and a little bit later we're going to tie. I'll tie one of these for you from scratch, so you can see how I do it. Like, how do I connect it to the fly line, the knots, and how do you connect it to the tippet? How do I put the tippet together? So we'll do it a little bit later, and it will all you know, come together. Yeah, it goes directly to the fly line. And you're going to read in many places, somebody's going to advise you to put a tapered piece of line there. Don't do it, because it's going to, I mean, you can do it, but it will be a disadvantage rather than advantage. As long as you're doing it with the right gear, because you need a nymphing rod for that, and we'll talk about it a little bit later and why.
Okay.
So the other key portion of your leader is obviously the tippet, which is the part that goes under the water. I mean, all of you are familiar with that. Typically, I like fishing with 2 nymphs when it's allowed. I know on the ground in many sections it's not, so you will fish with 1. You will see some people every now and then writing about fishing with 3 flies, the argument being that you present 3 fly to the fish. I used to do it. I don't like it. And most of the really good competition anglers that I know from Europe are fishing 2 flies now rather than 3. The reason quite simple. When you fish in complex currents, and the currents are going to end up pulling your flies in different directions, so it will spoil the natural drift of all of the flies, and you'll be catching less fish, even though you have 3 flies in the water. And usually one of them is a little bit too high for most fish anyway, because you'll be getting most of the fish close to the bottom. That's where they are when they're feeding on nymphs. So for the tippet, the materials, you can use fluorocarbon, you can use copolymer or mono. We'll talk a little bit later about the differences between those and what we prefer. The thing to remember about the tippet, the combination between cider and tippet, is that the tippet should always be lower diameter and weaker than the cider, so you're going to break off during the day. That's one of the realities of European nymphing. If you're not catching the bottom every now and then and losing some nymphs, you're not going to be catching fish. So you don't want to lose your whole leader. You just want to break off your tippet, tie a new piece of tippet, and carry on. So typically, let's say if your cider is at 6.5x, you want to have a tippet that is maybe 5 or 5.5. So there has to be a little bit of difference between the two, because the thing to remember is that the materials that we use for tippet are usually pretty strong these days, but colored mono is actually weak for its diameter, just because of the chemistry of making it colored. It makes it weaker. So you want to have a little bit of a difference in the diameters there. This is my nymphing line here on my reel, and nymphing line are essentially they're level lines. They don't come in different weights because you don't need that really. You're not doing traditional casting. The better it is, for the same reasons that we spoke about the cider. Because if you fish at a distance every now and then, you're going to have a bit of your fly line out of the fly rod, and you don't want it to go like this and drag your whole rig and lose sensitivity. You also don't want it to do this in the guides, which, if you're using a one of your 5-weight double taper that you've been using for dry flies, if you go nymphing with that, you're going to find it going like this, especially in between your stripping guide and the last portion there. And that means you're not going to be in contact with your flies. So what I have at the end of my, what I've done at the end of my fly line, a lot of them come with a factory-made loop. None of them are small enough to my liking. I want it to be as small as possible so it goes smoothly through the guides when I cast. So you will see there's this thing. You can see how small it is, but it's actually a loop. And the way you do it is by peeling off a portion of the coating of the fly line, doubling it up, and pretty much whip finishing it the way you will whip finish a fly, and using some super glue there. And that thing's pretty strong, strong enough to take you through a few seasons before it falls apart. It's not gonna, if you do it properly, it's not gonna break on you or open up. Makes a big difference in the way this moves through the guides. Ciprian is going to show you another way to do that a little bit later. So what I have here is a piece of tricolor Hannock indicator line. And the way I attach to my leader is basically with a simple clinch or improved clinch. And it becomes very, very small. Now I'm going to take the length of the cider that I want. Most of the time you'll be fishing with a 10-foot rod or longer. In competition, we have a rule that our entire leader cannot be more than 2 rod lengths. So typically that gives us to about 14 feet of cider if we're using 6 feet of tippet. But if in regular fishing, if you can handle more than that, you can definitely go ahead and do it. But don't go crazy on it with like some people do with 30, 40 feet of cider, because one of the problems you're going to find is going to twist on you during the day. So 14 feet. I know that the span of my arms here is about 6 feet. That's how I measure everything on the stream. So 2 times of that is 12, and 2 more, and I have the end of the cider. So what do you do at the end of the cider? There's a couple of things you can do. The lazy way is to use a tippet ring. So these are the tippet, the micro rings, basically. So you tie a clinch or improved clinch on one end, and then the same thing on the other. They're pretty handy. They're very strong. The downside, as small as they are, they have some weight in them, so they're going to give a tiny little kink to your leader. So if you want your leader to be absolutely straight, when you're trout fishing with small flies, I prefer to actually make a little loop at the end of my line from the line itself. But if you're fishing for bass and steelhead, the rig is heavy enough, it doesn't really matter. That's when I would use the tippet rings. So the other thing is you can do a perfection loop, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with what the perfection loop is. I'm just gonna, but there's a little trick about it when you want to get it really small. I'm not going to worry about it, but the thing I wanted to show you is how you can make it super small. So I'm using a hook here because I want the diameter of my loop to be about, as big as the hook itself. So that's pretty small. So I'm going to grab that, and then the loose end is the one that I want to keep straight. Sorry, I'm going to use my mouth here and tighten up all the way down. When I get to the point where the loop is the size that I want, I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to put the loose end to the side and the other one here and tighten up the knot. So I'm going all the way. Now you can see I locked it about here. So that's how small it is. And that goes easy through the guides. It doesn't look like this big thing on your leader there. Now, this being said, some people like to make that knot bigger so they can see it when they're nymphing. So if you like that, you can do that. I like it as small as possible. The other reason why I prefer the loop as opposed to the micro ring is that it's made of fly line, and the fly line stretches. So it helps to absorb a little bit the take, and when you're fighting the fish, while the metallic micro ring is actually digging into your fly line. So the next part is the tying once you have that, you tie your tippet portion on. So if you're tying 2 flies, something that a lot of people will do, I'm going to use a colored mono because it's easy to see. A lot of people will do is that, they will cut off the piece of that they need for their second fly, like separately, and then tie it on the main line. Wherever you want to have it. I don't like that because what happens on the river all the time is the wind blows, or this is too small, and you drop it, and then you have to go and repeat the whole process again. I'm sure everyone can relate to that. It certainly happens to me a lot. But something very simple is, so you're going to calculate how much line you're going to have here. You're going to go ahead and you're going to tie it to the cider already. Then you're going to take the length that you want to be, fishing. So for me, this is about 6.5 feet when nymphing. And then I'm going to calculate a little extra portion that I'm going to need for my dropper, maybe about this long. You don't want your dropper to be too long. And I'm going to cut. So this is attached to my cider already, and the cider is attached to the fly line. So if I were to drop something, I'm not going to lose this piece. Everything is there. Then I'm going to double it up to the point where I want my dropper to be. And for me, this is usually about an arm length, about 60 centimeters. So that's 2 feet. In competition, we're restricted to having only 50 centimeters between flies, but I want it to be a little bit longer because I will be tying flies during the day, so it will be getting shorter and shorter. But regardless of competition, I find from experience that, about an arm's length between the two flies is, most of the time what you need. So you double it up to that point and you just tie it all together. So you have a loop on this side and you just go like a double surgeon. So, the simplest knot. Tie it up, you can get rid of the tag. Now you're going to have a loop here. And the sweet thing about this, you can take either side of the loop. It doesn't really matter. And you just cut it to the length that you want your dropper to be. And you have your dropper where you're going to put your second nymph and then the first one. And you went through the whole process without taking any chances that you're going to drop anything in the water and start everything from scratch. That's what I like about this, and you just can't go wrong with a double surgeon. You can pick either side. It's the exact same strength, no difference. I don't know, Ciprian, if you want to show,
Yeah.
Ciprian has a different way to tie the cider to the fly line, which is a little bit faster than making your micro loop.
Well, it's about the leader to the fly line, and actually it's not faster because it's gonna take a little bit longer.
You
What
can do it on the stream.
Yeah. Well, what I do to connect the leader to my fly line is actually I connect the leader to the core of the fly line. So what I do, I take off the coating of the fly line, and I just made how it's called, it's a blood knot between the leader and the core of the fly line. Why I do that is because I found it goes through the guides really fast, really easy, and actually you're gonna earn a little bit more sensitivity. So you're gonna feel even better those small touches of the fishes. When they take and they're really no aggressive, you're gonna feel those soft takes. So that's the reason why I do that, because I think that the micro, let's say the micro loop at the end, it's good, it's okay, but still gonna have a bit of resistance to the guides. So when you want to cast long, let's say, like if you fish like Spanish nymphing really long, you really need to cast a little bit. So you need to take out that fly line from your reel. And one more thing about the about the nymphing line is like what you really need to look about. It's you need a line with no memory. That's very important. So the line I'm using right now, you can say it's like zero memory. As you can see, it's soft, so it's gonna give you a little bit of extra sensitivity, because lots of fly lines, they're stiff and you're gonna lose sensitivity with those fly lines. But what I'll do right now, I will just break off my leader, and this is my fly line. So I'll just show you guys how the fastest way and the easiest way to take off the coating. It's by using a strong mono, and you just make a snag like this.
Just make sure you have it in the camera.
Yeah. And you go on the fly line, and then you just pull, and you see the coating is coming off. So now what's exposed here? This is the core, which is just like a piece of
Braid.
backing, let's say, like this. So now I will connect the leader to the core of the fly line. So I will do a blood knot, but I will do it differently, you know. So first I will just go with the core. I will turn about 4 or 5 times. There you go. So now I will go with the leader. I'll do the same thing. There it is. All that's left is just to cut off the tags. Make sure you cut them off really, really short, because you don't want nothing to interfere with your guides. And this is it.
So the thing is, if I'm fishing and I'm carrying like a standard 4-weight forward line or double taper line, and then I want to switch to nymphing, but I don't want to carry an extra spool.
Okay.
So I say I have like a 30 feet of 0 weight with a loop to loop. You know how they have like people sell sync tips and all these different tips. So then I put that on, and then I could go from there to my leader. No,
don't waste your money on anything like that.
Yeah.
What I would do is if that's what you want to do, which I wouldn't advise, because you're gonna have a very awkward nymphing rig. But if you don't want to use invest in a nymphing fly line, then just fish with a very long sider so that your line doesn't even get out of your reel, and you'll be okay.
Oh.
So yeah, you use a little bit more of line, which is cheap, but you don't have to buy
a separate nymphing line and carry it on a spool.
Nymphing line. Although I would strongly advise you to get one if you can, because it makes a huge difference.
They're not that expensive now.
No, they're just they cost the same like any fly line, and they're level, which means that when you wear off one part, you can turn and fish the other. You can even cut them if a portion of it wears, because you never really have the whole line out. So once you have one, you're going to be using it for a long time.
Yeah, and when it starts to get damaged, you just cut off the part that's damaged. Like it's going to be damaged probably for a meter and a half, 2 meters, and eventually you can turn over the line, and you're going to have a new end on the other end. Which is like it's going to last forever. I mean, forever for about depends how much you fish. For me, it's nothing more than 3-4 years.
I was going to say mine has lasted 5 years, and I haven't gone through it yet, and I don't fish as much with these guys.
I kind of like use and abuse my equipment, like I fish a lot. So that's like I change a pair of waders at least once a year, and the boot's the same. It's like, wow, that's how it is. Yeah, but the advantage with the fly line is when you use, let's say, a nymphing line, I don't know, you can feel that line between your fingers. When you do nymphing, it's involved a lot of sensitivity. You're gonna feel a lot of those touches. You're gonna feel everything. So that's why it's not the same like just the mono between your fingers. It's a fly line which gonna increase your sensitivity. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's true, and that's the one thing that I can say, because I used to fish with super long pieces of mono when that was allowed in competition. It's not anymore, but one of the downsides of this is that just handling that in your fingers is not as easy. It will slip, it will go, and the fly line is just a little bit more manageable. And the other thing is, when you put a really long piece of mono, it's gonna twist. So you will have to untwist it every now and then, which is not too difficult. You take your flies off, you run it down the current, and the current straightens it up. But it will be a problem that you can have.
So when you're fishing, then you're really only handling the 0 weight line. You're not actually handling the leader.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it can get really close sometimes if I'm fishing very, very close to myself, but it's almost never in my hands. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I like to feel the nymphing line between my fingers.
yeah. I mean, I think what we have to do is like when this whole COVID thing is over and we can just come and give a class for you on the water, guys, and it's, you know, it's much easier than you know,
You have to
showing a
see
fishing
it.
technique is a little bit hard online. There's a
Yeah.
bunch of videos. I mean, we can send you some links if you want to watch some things, of course.
Absolutely.
But you know, the best thing is that when we can, you know, we'll be absolutely happy to, you know, come over and just do a class on the water.
You need to experience yourself. You need to see the difference between a nymphing rod, let's say like this, and a regular fly fishing rod, because it's not the same thing, you know. I mean, you can do it. You can do it with a regular fly rod. You can do it with a regular fly line, you know, but you're not gonna have the same results. It's like playing soccer with American football, uh, let's say ball, you know. You're gonna score, but it's not gonna score the same, you know, like with a soccer ball, which is the same thing, you know, because those rods are designed and all the equipment goes together, leader, fly line, rod, everything goes together.
Yeah. So the other thing is that if you're gonna be nymphing with like these leaders that I described to you, if you want to go really low diameter, which it means you can use really small flies. But to be able to cast these flies, you need a rod that will be loaded by them. So if you're fishing with a 4, 5, or 6 weight, it's not going to happen because it's very light for that. So you want a proper 2 or 3 weight nymphing rod, which actually gets loaded. So, you know, some people tell you, oh, there's not much casting in European nymphing. No, there's a lot. It's just different. So
Yeah.
you got to understand the dynamics of that. The same thing. You need to load your rod with some weight so that the rod casts it out. When you use a regular fly line, is a fly line. In nymphing, your leader weights nothing, so it's actually the weight of your flies. So if you want to fish really small flies, which is what works in pressured waters a lot of the time, and I know the Grand is not a difference, and you guys can only fish 1, 2. In most places, you actually want the rod that's going to get loaded and you'll be able to cast that, you know, as opposed to struggling to get it out there with your 4 or 5 weight. So that makes a huge difference on a nymphing rig. I
And
mean,
also,
not to add the added sensitivity of a low weight rod, the ability to handle fish with low tippets, like very low
that's
tippets.
what I want to say.
And this is kind of the next thing we wanted to go into. I mean, if we go back to the presentation, which talk a little bit about tippet and materials, and you know what is good, what isn't, and why. About the siders, I just wanted to show you a few options here for siders. Hanak has both bicolor and tricolor indicators. Remember I spoke to you about you don't want to put knots on your leader. You just buy a tricolor indicator and you run it all straight to the tippet. That's all you have to do. There's 3 colors there. Comes in different diameters. And bicolor is about the same thing anyway. If you're okay with 2 colors instead of 3, both are fine to me. I don't really make much of a difference between the 2. And then there's all sorts of color lines that you can get to you know, build your own leader if you wanted to. These are actually French, the ones that are on the presentation, by a company called Pezot et Michel, I think, from France. And I really, really like them because they're very supple, like very sensitive and hydrophobic, and they shoot out really well. But there's tons of options you're going to find. But try and find the lower diameter ones. And those are, you know, you will find, for some reason, North America, most of the companies are still offering you things like 0.18, 0.20, but you need the 0.15 and the 0.16 maybe. And then you kind of get limited to, I think, Hanak and a few other brands. And but they're there. I mean, it's not difficult to get them. We have them in our shop. We're actually Hanak's distributor for half of Canada. So we carry all of that, and the fly shops that have it get it from us as well. But now about the the tippet. One of the things that really amazed me. And when I first came to Canada about 20 years ago, I went to fly in a shop, like a fishing shop, and I looked at a spool of line, and everything that was marked on it was the breaking strain in pounds, and didn't show me diameter or anything else. And I was like, what is this? Because for me, the most important thing where everything starts from is diameter. Because diameter determines how fast your flies are going to sink. It determines how natural they're going to drift. And those things are more important, maybe even than the type of fly that you're using for you to be able to catch fish. So you need to, even if you're looking at breaking strain, you have to compare it, look at it compared to, vis-a-vis the diameter and find the best combination there. So, I was Googling things the other day, and I saw somebody put a question, what diameter is a 4-pound line? Well, it is different diameters depending on the material and the brand and the model, because it's not all the same. So what you want to find is something that is thin, so you can have good presentation, but is also strong. And there's lines of that in the market. They're not ridiculously expensive either. They're actually very affordable. I'll show you a few options of what we use. But then, even if most of the makers out there are going to stop there. They're going to show you on the spool the breaking strain and the diameter of the line. But there's more to that. The knot strength of every line is not, there are lines that actually have lower breaking strain but better knot strength. It's just the reality. There's the thing, abrasion resistance. I fished with some nice supple lines with great presentation of the nymphs, but in a couple of hours they're all frayed and you have to change them, so you don't want that as well. The stretch of the line matters a lot. Like, for example, fluorocarbon and mono stretch in different ways, so that plays a role when hooking fish and playing fish. And one thing that almost nobody looks like is shine.
Yeah.
I loved fishing. I used to fish a lot with Straft, which is a German line, extremely strong, great, parameters, great knot strength, and so on and so on. But it has a bit of a high shine. And then if you come across something else that is just as strong, but it's dull, like the maker actually made the investment to pay attention to that level of detail, and that makes a difference. So what we use, we've been using for the last 3 years now, is the tippet material that's made by Arcai. I know people call it Arcai here in Canada, but it's actually a Spanish company of our friend David Arcai, who's a 4-time world champion. And these are really, really nice, both the copolymer and the fluorocarbon. Different price ranges, of course. Fluoro is always more expensive. What I would say, at least in my own experience, is that you're going to read about fluorocarbon having the lower reflection rate and not being so visible in the water and so on. It's all true, but when you're fishing in very low diameters, like 7x and 8x sometimes as we go on the river with nymphing, I don't think the fish can really tell the difference in that. When you go higher up, maybe for steelheading, I think fluorocarbon is definitely better. For lake fishing with higher diameters, fluorocarbon is definitely better. In the low river diameters, I don't know. Again, the other thing, fluorocarbon sinks, copolymer floats. Again, in higher diameters, you're going to feel the differences in the way of your flies are sinking and the presentation. In the lower diameters, I think the difference is negligible. So you can play with both, see what you like. Copolymer is stronger than fluorocarbon, almost invariably. But what we like about this company is that he really pays attention to all of these things. So the lines are low shine, they have very good abrasion resistance, and most importantly, they're honest. what you see on the spool is what the line is, and it's marked to, you know, the second decimal point. In fact, the fluoro to the third decimal point. I'm going to say here, I'm not going to put names out there, but a big part of the line makers on the market are lying out straight. They will put either a higher breaking strain on the spool, or they will mark a diameter that is not the right diameter. And it's very easy to find if you have a micrometer, you know, get a few different blends and play with them. And we've found, you know, sometimes very big discrepancies. We were testing one last year that we wanted to sell through our fly shop, and we're both amazed. Like, we're handling these 20-inch wild browns with, you know, a 7x fluoro. And then it was measured with a micrometer, and we found that it's not 7x at all.
Yeah.
So
it was something like
when you play
5x.
with low diameters, it actually does matter. You want to be fishing what you know you want to be to gives you the right presentation and so on. So and then it's worth your money. So we really care about makers that are honest about what they put on the spool.
Actually, our case so obsessed with that he even put over here like 0.152. So it's not 0.15. It goes like the micro, you know, which is you're not gonna see on any other company. So they give you the exact diameters of the line, which is.
I mean, the sort of the down to the triple decimal points. You don't need to be as crazy, you know, but it's worth thinking about these things and, you know, getting something that is worth your money. They're all about the same price range from the different companies, but, you know, some are better than others. Something else I wanted to show you is I like carrying with me pre-made leaders, or maybe sometimes just siders. So on my vest, I actually have this with Velcro. And very easy. They're very easy to put a leader on. You just have to make sure you take like a knife and you do a little groove here. So when you wind everything, the little end, the tag end of your leader is going to be stuck in it. So it's very easy. You pull it out, you tie it to the fly line, or, you know, if it's tippet to the cider, and you pull it out and you keep fishing. So very easy to make changes on the water. It's always worth carrying one or two of these. Makes your life easier instead of having to retie. Or let's say you want to change the diameter, the whole thing, as I do sometimes. If I'm dealing with bigger fish, I want to get a little bit heavier, so I have a heavier one here, and I've even marking on them what they are. So it's just a little convenience. I think we the rod, typically the nymphing rods will be at least 10 feet. I wouldn't bother with anything shorter, even if you're fishing small streams, simply because you need that reach. If you're fishing more what we'll call the check style, which is right under the rod tip, close to you, 10 feet is okay. It's a good all-round. But if you want to have a little bit more reach, and I think you need that on the ground because it, you know, or on the credit particularly, because the fish are really pressured, then a 10'6" is sort of a good option as well. You want a 2 or a 3 weight rod. I personally like the 2 weights for our fishing conditions in Ontario. I barely ever need something heavier than that for trout. And I go for steelhead with my 3 weight. And there's no problem landing them. So that's on the rods. We have in our shop rods from 2 brands. Hanak is a Czech company that's been in this business for over 20 years, so they really know Czech nymphing, and they have a range of rods from an entry level about $200 to, you know, top of the line. And then we have the Arkai, which is really high-end rod. I mean, he brands himself as making champions equipment, and that's what his equipment is designed for. It's those are sort of Spanish nymphing rods, and they're nano rods, so
we have
it's very difficult to break. Yeah, and we have another Spanish company, Amaxia, which I was their Canadian pro staff, like dating back, what, more than 10 years ago. And they're also very, very nice. And these are all companies that have been making fly rods for nymphing for a long time. So they really know what goes into it. You're going to find that just about any company these days is making rods for nymphing. It's become so popular.
Well, they
the
call
reality
them.
About 80%
They
of
call
them
them,
don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, they call them nymphing rods, but they are not actually nymphing rods. That like the market right now, it's invaded with 10 feet 3-weight rods, but they say, okay, this is a nymphing, but it's not the nymphing rod because it's not the same action, you know. So in my opinion, is like for a high end nymphing rod, let's say Maxi RK, Hanak, they can build a nymphing rod, a 3-weight 10.6. So let's say 10 and a half. But for the others, like say for the cheaper nymphing rods, I won't go more than 10 feet because you're gonna change the action and you're gonna just have a piece of rod that's bouncing in your hands, and you don't want that in nymphing because you need a rod that's not bouncing. That's for sure. You need a rod that's fast action for the first 3 segments, and for the tip of the rod you need something soft, so it's going to work with the flies, it's going to give you the sensitivity, you know. But all those cheap nymphing rods that you can find on the market, they're just going to do bouncing. So you're going to cast and the rod is going to bounce like this, and you don't want that.
It's a question here it's Mark here. Ivo, you just mentioned you go steelheading with 3-weight, which is amazing for me to hear because usually my ears would say, oh, people say 7, 8, 9-weight, but you're going with but I'm guessing that's your experience. I mean, would you have gone steelheading with a 3-weight like maybe 15 years ago, or is it really?
No, when I started, I was doing it with a 7, but I don't think it's only an experience. We're kind of conditioned to believe that, you know, you have to be out there with a 7-weight or a 6-weight for steelhead. It depends on the river as well and where you are. So where I fished my 3-weight this year was on the Ganaraska, which is, you know, it's a relatively small stream, very pressured. There was tons of fishermen on the river, and there will be because everyone knows when the fish are there. So I had to fish light tippets to get those fish to take. And you know, if I put a light tippet on a 7-weight, I'll be breaking these fish off like crazy. If I put a heavy tippet, I can't really give them the same presentation. And it's not just about seeing the tippet; it's about drifting a small fly to them properly. And they're perfectly landable with a 3-weight and say, you know, 0, what did I fish in terms of tippet? 0.135, I think I fished, which is like 6x. And you're going to hook a lot more fish.
Oh, yeah.
And you don't have your drag set at all?
No, I do set that it's just kind of finely set. I mean, when you're using a small, like the reels that we use for nymphing are, because you asked about reels, there's all sorts of options. I mean, there's barely anything like reel specifically designed for nymphing. You just want it to be light enough so it balances your rod. And that's very important. And what balance is meaning that when you put the reel on the handle and you put your finger on the front of the cork, it should be either level or maybe a little bit tip heavy. That's also okay. Level is ideal, but you never want the opposite. You never want it to be heavy on the reel side because that's going to get you tired very quickly during the day because you'll be stretching that hand out, drifting the whole time, and it's just not good when you have it the other way. So you want a reel that's light enough to, you know, to balance your rod. And I mean, this is sort of our own, which we picked because it balances most 2- and 3-weight rods. Tons of options out there. And you want something with a fine drag, of course. We even fish some reels without a drag. When we fish the Italian semi-automatic reels, those don't have a drag, but you know, that's fine.
it's not a if I may just say, it's not a huge reel because the
No.
nymphing line is thin and the filament is thin, right? All the
Well,
leader is thin.
when sorry, when you fish for a big fish, especially with the 3 weight, you need a good reel. That's for sure. You need something that's working well. Like
But
I was
a
fishing.
decent drag.
Yeah, and you need a good reel. Like you don't need something like you can work with. And what I like about those reels is like you give one shot and go over and over and over, so you can just pull in the line really
It's
fast.
easy to pick up line. I mean, because when you've made a cast, you want to pick up line to go to the next spot. Instead of doing this, you just go this and fix everything. You move to the next spot, and that's sort of the nice thing about it. As I said, it's one option. Tons of options out there. Balance your rod properly. Make sure you have a decent drag, and you're okay.
I've got a question for you. When you're fishing, are you using weighted nymphs, or are you using a split shot a foot above the nymph, or are you using any weight?
Yeah, okay. I do not use split shot because split shot doesn't have a hook on it and it doesn't catch fish. So I use weighted nymphs, most of us do that. We do this, and what you do is you basically tie them with different diameters of tungsten beads, which gives them different weights. So as you're fishing, you're constantly playing with the weight to find the one that's right for the depth and the speed that you're fishing in. So the one that's going to give you the right presentation, which is one where you want the fly to go down to the bottom, but not be dragging on it. But then you don't want it to be light, so it stays somewhere high up and passes super fast, and the fish doesn't have a chance to even see it. So it's kind of a game of constant adjustment. I'd say on the Grand River where you guys fish, most of the time a 3.5 millimeter to 3 milliliter tungsten bead is doing the job. From my experience, maybe in the summer you may have to go to 2.8, 2.5 and really skinny and slow water. I like, and a lot of the guys that do that will tie sometimes the same pattern, but with different sizes of beads. So you play with that depending on the spot where you are. And the other thing that matters more than the pattern, at least in my experience, is the color of the beads. Sometimes the fish will key on one color over the other, and that's all you have to do. The three most used colors are gold, copper, and silver. And I know people that are, several time world champions, and that's all they will do. They will play with those three. When you fish with two flies, when that's allowed, you have the luxury of, putting different colors of beads and see what the fish prefers. They give them something different. It's just one of those very interesting things, the bead color and fish. And sometimes it's if you find that a lot of the people have been using one color on the river, it works for a while, then the fish learn about it, and you put something else to the same fish, and they will pick it. We observe that in competition all the time. There's whole strategies of how do you adjust your bead color during your session as the fish get more pressured. And sometimes you catch one fish with one bead color and they'll start refusing it, and then you're going to change and you're going to get the fish again with a different color. So yeah, weight and bead color are more important than the pattern.
Is there, Ciprian, Ivo, is there a go-to knot that you use for tying your fly to the tippet or leader? I think Ian Troop told us he likes the Davy knot. Do you guys have a go-to, or it depends?
For me, it's an improved clinch because I'm just so used to it and I tie it very quickly. But people have different knots. I'd say whatever is.
I'll go with a simple clinch.
Fast and easy for you to tie.
Simple clinch. it's good
They,
enough.
they all have about the same breaking strain, like the clinch, the improved clinch, the Davy. Davy's probably a little bit stronger. But not too different. Hard to tell the difference. Have for those of you that are looking for something that's cost efficient, Hanak has several nymphing models where the rod has an extension system. So you will have basically 3 or 4 different lengths in the same rod that you can play with, depending on where you're fishing. They're in the about $400 range, I think, and we're getting pretty good reviews on them from people that have bought them.